And I also think if you just look at the business transactions, there's a lot more evidence that he's making policy towards Saudi Arabia and Israel that's that would be favorable to his business interests than Russia. Yes, you know, if he was making deals while running for office for Trump Tower in Moscow, is that ethical? No. But is it illegal? No, not that I know of. The other thing that I wanted to ask you about is, you know, I think along with whether, I mean, who knows, maybe Mueller has something and we'll all have egg on our face, but it's this new McCarthyism. So I want to bring up the thing about Rania Khalek, who's a journalist based in the Middle East. She does viral videos that, you know, are very critical of the United States government, the United States intelligence agencies, particularly you know, the Russia hysteria. She's been critical of U.S. coup attempts in Venezuela, and we started seeing people even attacking Congressman Ro Khanna for the temerity to like retweet her, you know. And then all of a sudden, you see the collaboration of CNN doing this ridiculous report on, oh my God, breaking news, they're funded by Russia, which wasn't a secret. Rania Khalek's group, I think it's called In the Now. So what are your thoughts on this new McCarthyism? Because I've seen it. I know Matt Taibbi's been called a Russian agent, Aaron Mate, Michael Tracey, Glenn Greenwald, Jimmy Dore. There is really this McCarthyism that's this almost like this digital, I would call it a digital posse.
Whenever people accuse me of being a Kremlin agent or something, I keep telling them I'm waiting for the check to arrive, but it hasn't come yet.
Because you do have a growing Patreon. Good plug for your Patreon.
Yeah. Patreon.com/mtracy. Yeah. Tracy with an E. All my life, people have been misspelling my last name, and I, you know.
First world problems. Yes. Keep going.
So, the Rania example is just one of many. They're indicative of a total corrosive impact that is now ingrained in much of the populace. And I'm thinking back to 2017 when I was going to all these Democratic town halls. When I would be in, you know, Northern California somewhere at a Republican town hall, and the most popular issue that the constituents who showed up wanted to discuss was Russia. They'd be waving their signs with, you know, Trump hearts Putin, and all these kind of crazy iconographies that, you know, were called the Soviet era. It was just very absurd and farcical. But when you have so much of that being trumpeted so intensively for so long, eventually people are just going to, at a subconscious level, give over their critical faculties and just become a nerd to the hysterical tenor of it all. Right. And so they don't raise any objections when somebody like Rania is the victim of a coordinated attempt from CNN and Facebook to basically oust her from one of the primary means of promulgating content now on the flimsiest of grounds, which weren't applied to other outlets. I think the violation supposedly was that on the Facebook page it wasn't disclosed that that her outlet receives partial funding from some Russian government
Which, by the way,
entity.
is a standard for nobody else.
Right.
No other outlet. CNN is not made to say we are funded by AT&T, who has done mass surveillance all over the country. None of these outlets are made to say who they're funded by.
And I think in general it would be good practice if outlets, you know, more publicly disclose where they receive funding, if it's from a government, if it's from some endowment, whatever it may be. So I don't have a problem with that. Yeah, I have a problem with the selectivity. I have a problem with how standards are applied for the sole purpose of punishing anybody who has the remotest, vaguest affiliation with Russia. And what people think is Russia now is like so expansive that you could have some, you know, minor dealing with somebody who could be claimed to have a connection to the Russian government, you know, 20 years ago, and that's as if you're this agent of the Russian state, which is also a farce. And
also playing devil's advocate, so a lot of people have criticized you as basically that you're pointing these things out, you're coming off like you're a Trump supporter, this and that. Yet I've heard you before criticize Trump. It just seems like because you're making this argument not to basically create an alternative narrative about a Russian collusion, that there's this tacit, you're defending Trump. I assume you're not a Trump supporter.
Every single day since, I don't know, June of 2016 or something, I have been accused of being a Trump supporter. I am so numb to it at this point. Because, you know, not only is it demonstrably false, it's also not a logical, it doesn't logically follow from what anything I've said about the Russia narrative. In fact, it's the inverse. It's the opposite. The people who have been making this criticism one of the defining traits of the Trump era are helping Trump. Because again, they're going to give him grounds to claim vindication. Mm-hmm. And they're drowning out other legitimate criticisms of Trump. So don't call me a Trump supporter if you've been once screaming nonstop about Russia and now you're giving Trump a weapon.
So yeah, it sounds like your argument is really go after Trump on legitimate things, because there's plenty, not a Cold War reenactment.
Right, exactly. I've been going at Trump hard on Venezuela because he sounds like George W. Bush. Mm-hmm. He delegated that whole thing to Pence and Bolton and Pompeo.
And Elliott Abrams.
Right, and Elliott Abrams, who's one of the quintessential neocons. Trump actually blocked Elliott Abrams from being appointed to the administration in early 2017 because he knew that Abrams was a neocon and presumably didn't want him affiliated with the administration. That's changed. Been intensely critical of that. I could go down the list. I mean, aspects of Syria policy. Again, I just gave you criticisms of Trump taking an excessively antagonistic line toward Russia. Mm-hmm. So there's plenty to criticize just in the realm of foreign policy alone, not to say anything about domestic.
And I also think it's never covered because everybody's focused on Russia. Trump has like doubled and tripled down on Obama's drone war, which only creates more terrorism. There's this theory, oh, we're not sending in ground troops, it's drones. No, I mean, you're killing, I mean, the numbers are all over the place, but you're killing tens of thousands, maybe more, of brown people all over the world. Yeah, maybe you're not sending American troops in to do it, but you're radicalizing people, because I know if my brother or my sister or my family member was blown up in school or going on a bus or whatever, I might be kind of pissed off.
Yeah, and the rate of civilian casualties has gone up substantially, yes, even in the more conventional warfare and like the ISIS war and things. Mm-hmm. But on foreign policy, it's complicated with Trump because look at Afghanistan. We're now closer to a peace deal with the Taliban than at any time since 2001. That includes the entire tenure of Obama. Right. He's withdrawing troops from Syria against the wishes of the vast majority of the national security establishment, to the point where James Mattis, who is maybe the most popular member of his administration, resigned in disgust. Mm-hmm. North Korea, the most recent summit was a bit of a setback, but you would have to expect setbacks over the course of groundbreaking diplomatic negotiations with a very isolated leader like Kim. So you have to take that in totality. And people often accuse me of being a Trump supporter or something because I would say, here's where there are some positive developments that you want to encourage, less belligerent tendencies that are more diplomatically oriented. And here are some bad things that you want to also take into consideration. But people aren't able to hold multiple ideas in their head at Trump because they're so blinkered by Trump as a persona.
But you've also brought up something when you mentioned Mattis. I think because Trump is such a departure from normal, United Corporations of America norms, where usually people are just as bad as Trump, but they don't tweet it and they don't sound like Trump. But we've gotten into this derangement where James Mattis is considered like the sound, reasonable thinking one in the room. George W. Bush, you have Joe Biden handing a Liberty Award to George W. Bush a couple months ago. I mean, there's a lot of people that in a normal civilized society would be in witness protection program, public relations wise. Now, because of Trump, Bill Kristol's been mainstreamed again, George W. Bush. Oh, people are saying, I miss the days of George W. Bush.
The intelligence services more broadly, I mean, they're the biggest cable news stars now. John Brennan, James Clapper, all these people have been utterly rehabilitated.
The FBI is amazing now.
Right, the FBI, Comey, McCabe raised hundreds of thousands of dollars when he was fired last year as if he was going to fall into destitution. Sure enough, his book has been #1 on the New York Times and Amazon bestsellers list now for since it came out. I mean, the guy's going to do well, but everybody latches on to whatever transient anti-Trump force is in the ether. Mm-hmm. And they don't have the ability to step back and look at bigger trends. Yeah. You mentioned Mattis. Mattis is one of the guys who convinced Trump to do this minor surge in Afghanistan in August 2017. Bear in mind that the Trump surge in Afghanistan was very small compared to the one Obama did. Mm-hmm. which resulted in the deadliest year in Afghanistan for U.S. troops of the entire war in 2010 to 2011. So Obama's surged in Afghanistan a lot more than Trump, but people don't realize that because they just assume that Trump would have to have had the worst possible approach compared to Obama. I don't think it's necessarily the case. I think one of the few things that is consistent about Trump is that he does have a genuine aversion to over-deployment of military resources around the world, and he wants to withdraw those resources where viable. Now he's running up against resistance from within the bureaucracy. Syria would be an example. John Bolton has tried to undermine the order that he gave in Syria. I think John Bolton, I think, also had undermined the most recent Korea summit. Mm-hmm. And Trump is ultimately responsible for appointing John Bolton, who is the biggest Iraq war supporter and is still unrepentant about it. And Trump says he's the biggest. Trump says he hates the Iraq war, yet he appoints Bolton.
Let me tell you.
That's something I wish a reporter would ask Trump.
Yeah.
I mean, that's something I would ask him. But nobody asks him like decent questions. It's always about like some incremental procedural Mueller thing that has no relevance in 2 weeks.
Right.
Hope you enjoyed that last video. Hop on over to statuscoup.com where you can sign up for our email list and become a member for as low as $5 to $10 a month. Membership is how we grow. That's statuscoup.com/join. And remember, join our email list so we can grow the revolution with you.